Welcome to The Homeless Conservative. My name is Blake Fisher. I'm joined today by my buddy Derek. Tim over there. He specifically wanted to talk about gun stuff, which I've not talked about yet on this, but I'm passionate about. And so specifically the thing you brought up that you wanted to talk about was how everyone to the left of us will always cite Australia's gun bans as the model for what the U.S. should do, which I think is interesting. I guess so. Let's talk a little bit about that first. About what I think there's some misconceptions of the gun ban. Obviously, it wasn't a gun ban. There are still guns in Australia. I think the first thing to know about Australia is that it has a smaller population than the state of Florida. So, that's hard, right?
May I chime in? Because
by all means.
I just got off the heels of a stint with an Australian-based company. I love them. Great accent, great people.
Solid accent. One of the best in the world.
Clueless on how many people, which actually most Americans are pretty clueless at how many people we actually have in the States. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But Australia and New Zealand, they get lumped together even though they're about a sea apart. But the two of them combined don't even equal Texas.
Right.
Yeah, it's less than that. So to put everything into perspective, like Texas has got just shy of 30 million people. Australia plus New Zealand combined is still less than that of the state of Texas. And then we still have, even just in the continuous, 47 other states, including California and Florida, who those three combined is a lot. So,
right. And so with those numbers, first of all, like you can't, I think the biggest problem that I see with a lot of left policy, and even honestly, the right's the same thing. The right's doing the same thing with like Hungary right now. They're trying to be like, we should be like Hungary, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, there's like 10 million people there. It's like the population of Houston, Texas has more people than that. And so I think it's always, I don't think that democracy, the laboratory of democracy, works super well internationally to be able to be like, well, that country did that one thing. Sometimes it does translate, but most of the time it's like you got a completely different set of people. You've got obviously sometimes different numbers of people. You've got different geographic situations. You got different backgrounds. And so it doesn't always, it's just like, oh, well, that worked over there. That doesn't, I don't even think that works state to state here in the United States, but it's at least like, well, we're all under this, somewhat the same form of government, slight differences between state legislatures and stuff, but generally they're all modeled after the federal kind of, branches of government and things like that. And so, it does tend to go, oh, well, that worked well in Virginia. Maybe we should try that here. And that works, but I don't know why everyone jumps to the international thing of being like, well, look at Australia. So here's some stats that I did. So this is one of those rare situations where you said, hey, you want to talk about this? So I had to do obviously some research because I was like, well, I know some about it, but I don't know everything about it in the sense that like, I know there's a lot of nuance there. So basically in 1996, there's a mass shooting there that killed 35 people. And almost immediately, within the next couple of months, they passed this thing where basically it's a mandatory buyback of certain kinds of weapons and voluntary buyback of other types. So the specific type they were trying to get rid of were semi-automatic rifles, commonly known as assault rifles, which is not really what they should be called, but that's what we have just ended up calling them. So that was the main purpose. So it's a mandatory buyback, meaning the government says, you got to give us that, or, it's illegal, but we'll give you money for it. We'll give you fair market value for what those guns are. And they confiscated something like 600,000 weapons. So that was estimated to be about, let's see, I wrote this down and I got to keep looking at it. Okay. So that basically was a fifth to a third of all of the firearms in Australia. So there are still really, 5 to 3 times more weapons that are still there. So if they confiscated 600,000, if that's a third of it, there's still 1,200. Or sorry, there's 120,000. Or sorry, that's not right. There were because they confiscated 600,000. So there's 1.2 million guns still in Australia on the low end,
right?
And there's something like 3 million on the high end. So it's not. They did not get rid of guns. They did not ban guns. You have to have a license to have a handgun. It did kind of restrict being able to carry them publicly for no reason. Essentially, like you have to have it's a license kind of situation, and they basically don't allow most people to carry. So I think, first of all, there's just a giant misconception about what Australia did, because some people say, well, they just banned guns. It's like, that's not exactly what happened, right? So, I mean, when you have this conversation with people, what's like, is that generally what comes up? Is that it?
It just cooks my brain because it's like they've heard some talking point on some cable news.
Our table's trying to fall.
And I'm just like, and the thing is, I'm 38, so I'm just a few years younger than you. Years? A year?
2 years. I'm 40 now.
Yeah, that's right.
I have now hit over the hill.
I have been shooting since I was probably 5.
Okay.
Like my family was very big on, you need to learn how to shoot, you need to learn how to hunt. Because they were the crazies, like, you know, in the Bible, it's like Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were like weird people, and like my family, they're going to watch this, and it's going to be awesome. They were like the modern...
Love them, but they're weird. That's fine. Yes, we all have weirdness in our families.
I mean, one of my earliest and fondest memories was my Uncle Steve showing me how to shoot a .357 Magnum at 5. And so I'm just like, this giant, dirty, hairy gun.
It's a bad idea.
Yeah. But it was like, you learn, because it's like, this is dangerous, but you can wield it in a manner where it's not unsafe. And so it's like, most people are just afraid of things that they don't know. And I have grace for that and sympathy and all the things, but I'm like, when somebody says something I don't like, I don't go try to take away their First Amendment right. Like, so why are you trying to infringe on my second? Because I'm just not afraid, because I've been taught proper gun safety. So when I have these conversations, it's just infuriating, because I'm like, you heard something somewhere that just like was bent enough to fit a narrative, and it's just like, that's just not true. And so it's like talking to people from Australia and New Zealand, I talk to them all the time, and I was like, when I was in the middle of building my AR, they're like, oh dude, like, you know, what are you doing, you know? And I'm like, you know, so they get really excited.
So were they like fascinated by it a little bit?
Oh, I told one guy from New Zealand, I'm like, bro, if you ever want to come to the States, like, I know people who have we can go blow some stuff up. And he was like, are you serious? And I'm like, absolutely. He got giddy like a child at Christmas. It was so great.
They
do
like, this, yeah, I guess in some states now, specifically with like Japanese tourists, because Japan's another place where they have like no access to guns. And Japan is way more locked down than Australia is, way more. And it's like tourist shooting, essentially. It's like, it's basically, hey, you know, shoot at watermelons and stuff like that. Where was I? I guess I was in... I think it was, oddly enough, in California, or it might have been Toronto even. It was a weird place where I was like, I saw a flyer, literally. I mean, it was clearly aimed at Japanese tourists and as sort of like that kind of thing. But it is interesting that even the people that are, I don't know, I think there's a curiosity to it for sure. But I think most of what people's fears are because they don't know about stuff. And I'm fine. If you don't want to have guns, totally fine with it. My wife doesn't really like guns. Sure. It's fine. Like she's kind of scared of them, but like she doesn't mind that I have them and that I carry and things like that. But it is, I find most of the stuff is misnomers.
Yes.
It's like, and to be fair, they've been told wrong.
Right.
I don't think it's that people are stupid.
Right.
I think it's that people have just been lied to is the wrong. Because I really think with a lot of the gun control stuff, it's not lying so much. It really is ignorance. Or at least I want to believe it is most of the time.
Textbook definition of ignorance. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, that's not a derogatory term. I'm taking that. I'm convinced to take that one back. Like everyone gets so offended. I'm like, I'm ignorant on many things. I like to learn. Like,
it's foolish to continue to be ignorant.
Boom.
But if you are ignorant because someone told you, like people getting confused between semi-automatic and automatic, that makes sense to me when like every news organization gets that wrong, you know, every one of them. And even like using assault rifle, you know, and trying to like most of the definitions, which I think we're really in a weird time where there's a lot of this going on where definitions, but it's always been the case with gun stuff that we've not done a good job at defining what the things are. So for the sake of that, let's define some things. Semi-automatic weapons, in case you're one of those people, and that's fine. We'll be the people that tell you what it is. Semi-automatic means you
can we get the reading rainbow graphic?
Yeah, we will. We'll put some graphics on this part, okay? We'll put some stuff on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so semi-automatic weapons mean you pull the trigger one time, one projectile goes out, and the mechanics of the weapon itself reload the next round into the chamber so that you can pull the trigger again and it shoots another bullet. But it is one trigger pull, one bullet fired. That's it.
Correct.
Although some gun nuts will say it's not a bullet, it's but whatever. Shut up. It's like, I hate those people can also
For all intents and
get
purposes.
out of here.
Yeah.
Like with your it's not a clip, it's a magazine. I mean, whatever. It's
I'm that guy.
there's some stuff that's popular culture. It's like
Yeah.
whatever. We know what you mean. It's like when you go to Starbucks and you're like, I'd like a large. They're like, there's no such thing as a large. I'm like, you know what the heck I'm talking about, okay? Don't pretend.
That Starbucks employee.
Don't pretend you don't, okay? Don't miss. So anyway, so that's semi-automatic weapons and semi-automatic rifles, specifically, the most popular of which is like the AR-15 kind of model. It is not the kind of thing where you pull the trigger like in the movies and it's like, that's not what's happening here. Military are the only people that can buy those unless they're,
Whoa.
you have to have a crazy license and they can't manufacture new ones since like 1980 something. I can't remember.
I think it was probably around the time of the 1986 Miami shootout, the FBI and that criminal.
I think it was
organization.
before that.
It was before that.
I think it was before
I
that.
think it was
Yeah.
around that time.
So this is not like the movies where, people are going around with these automatic weapons that when people say military grade, that's a complete misnomer. It's not real. The gun that I have is nothing like the thing that is issued to someone in the Army at all.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's just marketing garbage too.
It is, it is.
I did a lot of when I was building my own rifle. I did a lot of research into I was seeing this term a lot, mil spec. So
Marketing.
I asked a guy who was in the military. I'm like, what is this mil spec, and is it like? And he was just like,
Marketing.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
marketing.
marketing. It's
Yeah.
what it all military specification, and so even standard issue weapons that soldiers get, because I have a ton of Marine friends, a ton of friends from the Army as well, and you can get special issue stuff, or you can at your own expense buy something and then register it as your whatever, like your sidearm, your whatever, and a lot of times, a lot of those guys, a lot of people don't know this, is that they're like, we're not taking the standard issue stuff. So like mil spec is actually not a great marketing term at all. So,
But it works, I'm sure, or they wouldn't be using it. Yeah. They're reeling people in for sure. People that want to be military.
My family, the zealots.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. So the thing is, like, these terms matter a lot when we're talking about stuff. So Australia banned or bought back and sort of banned like semi-automatic rifles, essentially.
Right.
Like the AR-15, but really the problem with semi-automatic rifles is that that's not the only kind of semi-automatic. It's just the most popular one.
Yep.
And so, or style, and it's not really, it doesn't mean assault rifle. There's no such thing. I mean, a gun is dangerous, whether it's a Derringer or, you know what I mean? It still can kill you.
Yeah.
And so the assault rifle is also a misnomer. It's not what AR stands for.
It's like,
Armalite rifle.
The best analogy that I can use, it's like, it depends on whose hand that it's in.
Right.
It's I don't know if we're supposed to shout out other podcasts on here.
You can,
but
absolutely.
I
That's totally fine.
really like Coleon Noir. He talks a lot about, big 2A advocate, attorney based down in Dallas. He just recently did a clip where they were interviewing the Jacksonville sheriff. And he was just like, let's stop pretending that guns aren't inanimate objects.
Yeah.
And so I'm a pretty good shot. I'm not tactically trained.
Right.
So, people who are tactically trained could actually do more damage with two handguns than they ever could a standard 16-inch black rifle, because the black rifle is all scary, or assault rifle,
And the deadliest mass shooting before Vegas, it was Virginia State, which was two handguns.
Tech. Yep.
It was not, and that's not with someone that was like some tactical wizard. It's just you got a bunch of people in close quarters. Like that's not, you can pretty much indiscriminately shoot and kill people. And so anyway, the point was Australia quickly reacts to this mass shooting. The common thing that I see is like, well, Australia solved mass shootings. There's only been one since, essentially. In the 2000s, there was another one. And keep in mind, mass shootings also need to be defined well, because
the current definition is 3 or more, isn't it?
the real definition by the FBI, which I'm going to take the FBI's, because you have to pick something as the thing. And so the FBI, the way they track it is 4 or more.
4 or more. Okay.
And it's got to be indiscriminate in the sense that in a public place, it's not you kill 4 of your family members in your house. Okay. That's not a mass shooting. That's domestic violence. And the reason I think this is important is because you can't solve all violence with any, forgive me, silver bullet. But just really bad. It's just the first thing that came to my mind.
It's bad taste.
Really bad. But you really can't. Like gang violence in Chicago versus some kid taking a gun to school versus domestic violence versus suicide versus, these are all totally different problems. And when we try to lump them all together,
right.
I just think we're never going to, you cannot solve all of them with one solution. It's just, it's not possible. So I don't like that a lot of media and the left, you'll see things all the time that are like, this is the 237th mass shooting in 2023 so far. Not according to the FBI statistic. It's like, it's the first or whatever. And to me, that's a big problem because you've got to have the definition. So the definition that I go with mass shooting is what we think of, and what really makes the news is someone going to a public place and basically just trying to kill as many people as possible with there's no connection generally to those people. I mean, they might have gone to school there or worked there or something like that. Right. But even the workplace thing is a little bit different sometimes. Like workplace violence can be different. So you have to look at motivations in a country where you have way fewer people than the United States. And the United States just frankly is more violent than other countries across all weapon types, including fists and bats and hammers and things like that. So I don't know why. I mean, we could get into a lot of history and psychology there, but the United States is a more violent country just naturally, or not naturally, but without any sort of external factors. Australia really didn't have a violence problem before then. They didn't have a mass shooting problem. They had one mass shooting. And so pretending that you solved it when it's such a rare thing to happen in your country anyway. And keep in mind, 1996, this is before Columbine, right? Because that's not even till 99, 3 years later here. Yep. And that's really what kicks off, not that we hadn't had any before, but it certainly kicks off like the copycat and the media frenzy and all the stuff that goes on after that. So I don't think that using Australia to say that like Australia solved gun violence, I think is kind of a misnomer, because I looked up the stats because I was like, okay, let's look it up. Okay. So basically what happened is that after they passed it, so like I said, they got rid of about 600,000 guns, but that's a third to a fifth of what they think was really in the country estimation. So that's per capita, like if you per 100,000 people, mass shootings were already a statistical anomaly. Like it happened like once or twice in Australia. So we can't really prove that the gun buyback solved the problem. We also can't prove it made it worse, because it's kind of one of those things where correlation doesn't always equal causation, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Suicides and homicides are also a little difficult to tell, because the trend worldwide from about 1992 on was the murder rate was doing, well, let's see if you're watching this on video, it was doing this, it was going down. And I'll put all these charts up on the screen. But so it was already going down in Australia before they passed the bill, and it seems to go down at about the same rate that the United States did. Not that you can compare the two necessarily, but kind of worldwide, the trend was crime tended to, like violent crime, specifically murders with guns and stuff, was going down, and all violent crime was going down from the early 90s. It kind of rose up from the 70s into the early 90s and then started dropping. And that was in Australia as well as the United States. So again, we can't really even prove that the gun buyback did or didn't. I mean, it certainly didn't make things worse, I would say. There was not any more violent crime than there would have been as far as gun homicides. Right. Like that's what we're talking about specifically. And suicides are kind of the same thing. They were also trending down, same thing in the US. So it's a little hard to tell. This is really complicated data when you're looking at millions of people. Yes. So maybe it helped. I think that there are arguments that could say it obviously did. Obviously no one can, it's a lot harder for someone to take a semi-automatic rifle and go shoot indiscriminately in a public place in Australia than it is probably here, because we do allow the purchasing of that. So I think that that's fine if that's their point. But violent crime, violent crime did, theft, motor vehicle theft, robbery, they all went up in the years following and then started declining in 2001. So there was an uptick of that was a little bit weird. My theory on that would be, if you tell the normal non-criminal population that they can't carry guns to protect themselves anymore, you're going to have some violent crime from criminals that take advantage of that. I know that person's not going to have a weapon on them, so I can probably rob them, and not get shot in the process. Right. And I don't think people really think about how often that guns are used in the United States without being used. As far as like they serve their purpose without ever being drawn out of a holster. Because if you, like, for example, no one's going to go to H&H gun range with an AR and start indiscriminately shooting people.
No.
Because you will...
they'd have to be pretty far out of their mind in some form or fashion.
You know you're going to get shot in that situation very quickly. Yeah. And even in most of the mass shooting situations in America, we can have a whole nother conversation about mass shootings and why I think they actually happen and stuff. But generally, if we know the person's motivations, generally they picked a place based on the fact that they were going to kill as many people as they could before someone stopped them. And normally they pick a gun-free zone, so like a school or a mall or a place where there's a sign that says you can't bring guns, because law-abiding citizens will follow that rule. And, you know, if you're not law-abiding, you want to murder people, you don't care about the no gun sign on the door. And so I think that makes a big difference too, is that, like, I think that rise in violent crimes probably has a correlation. I think that there could be a causation there, because I think there is a mental, like I said, a criminal you're not going to walk into, I think there's a reason there are fewer mass shootings in places where people will probably be carrying guns in states like Texas, for example. It's not that they don't happen, but, you know, the most recent one that I can think of would be at like that church, which it's supposed to be illegal to carry guns in church in Texas, illegal. I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the places you're not supposed to. But I think people do. I don't think it's very well enforced.
Yeah, I was about to say, especially with Texas.
So the point is, like, you're going to have people are going to take advantage of criminals are going to take advantage of law-abiding citizens going along with laws like that, and so I would assume that might be an uptick. I actually didn't. You mentioned that you thought like knives and stuff like that. Most violent crime did go down, except for this like actual. Stabbings, shootings, murder, attempted, that kind of stuff went down regardless. Well, obviously, if stabbings and things like that are going down at the same rate as the shootings when you did a gun buyback kind of thing, I doubt that you managed to affect people's ability to use knives.
It's arguable, but I think it could negate the legislation that was passed that they're touting and pounding their chest about.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and to kind of tie it all together, because we kind of talked about Texas and Australia and New Zealand, because it's like those two kind of walk hand in hand, just like us in Texas. It's like the Kiwis don't want to be called Aussies. We don't want to be called Texans, vice versa.
Right.
So there's a lot of similarities there that are really funny. But I was talking to a friend who went to New Zealand, who's from Texas. And, you know, everyone, he said he walked into this convenience store because the crime rate is so low in New Zealand that you can hitchhike. And it's actually like really, if you're a man and a woman, he said, like a couple can get picked up easier than like two dudes.
Well, that makes sense.
And I get that, but it's like they didn't have any problem getting anywhere.
Yeah.
But they were hitchhiking, they got picked up. They stop off at this convenience store and there's a TV on, and everyone's like huddled around it because there was like this whole thing where this like guy held up, I can't remember if it was like a bang or what, irrelevant, at knife point. And when he said that, like as an American, I like chuckled. I was like, wait, what? Like, and he was like,
fly.
Yeah, he was like, you have to think because it's, you know, with the ban and everything, it's like, that's the new big, you know, it's like, it's just fear porn. It's nothing has changed in the last 30 years, you know? So it's like, oh, there's no more guns. So now we have to report and hype up, you know, the knife point robbery or whatever. So yeah, like, but it is safer overall. And so I would say that it would definitely negate that legislation to say, because everything was already trending down anyways, hand in hand. But there's also like a lot of like mental gymnastics that people do when they point at places like Australia, New Zealand, because it's like, well, you know, like our gun rates went down. I'm like, well, yeah, you confiscated 25% of them, of course, on a certain level. But then it's just like, also, it's like you have to look at the rest of what would be considered violent crime with other
and it was
instruments.
And it was already low, and it was going down before that shooting in '96 even happened. Mm-hmm. So the trend line was already that it was going like that kind of violent crime was going down.
Right.
So it's interesting to me though, because like one of the there's smarter people than me obviously that know about this, but it is interesting that Australia doesn't have, being that its history is being like
penal colony.
Yeah, penal colony. Yeah. It is a little surprising that it doesn't have higher violent crime, because like America's not that, but America is more violent. So it's a weird. You'd have to really dive into a lot of history and a lot of stuff, and obviously we were willing to get violent to overthrow a tyrannical government, and so there's probably just a little bit of that DNA and history that gets passed down that makes us more, like I said, we get more fist fights than people in other countries and stuff too. So it's kind of a weird thing, and so you cannot look at those two things. But I mean, here's the thing. So okay, that's one thing. But it went up like crazy in the same period of time. Sexual assault went up consistently since 1996. From 80 per 100,000 people in 1996 to 106 in 2019. And assault has also gone up from like 1,400 per 100,000 in 96 to 3,300 in 2013, and then dropped slightly to 2,736 per 100,000 in 2019. But that's double what it was 20 years before that. So that's where I'm like, okay, assaults are going up, while obviously gun violence continue to go down. But that's just because the criminals know if you want to assault someone, you're not going to be met with, for example, the sexual assault thing is a really important thing, because generally speaking, if you're a guy and you attack a female, you are going to have the physical upper hand in that situation if they don't have a weapon. And so it makes sense to me that if you go, okay, well, I know we've got an unarmed female population who are kind of like sitting ducks. Yep. I mean, if that is what your mentality is, that you want to be violent like that towards women, it makes sense that you're going to feel more confident about doing that in a place where they don't have a weapon. Because if I were a woman, I carry in anyway, but if I were a woman, I would definitely, because I just think that you are more likely to be a victim than if you're a guy, because I'm not gonna, if some guy, you and me are probably not great examples. Neither one of us are like big, strong guys.
Macho guys, yeah.
But for the most part, I would think a criminal would be more likely to take advantage of me if he saw me than our friend Lucas Thomas or something like that.
Yeah.
He's a strong guy, would not mess with him kind of thing. And I think that doesn't work with men and women. So I think sexual assault's going up. Not saying correlation equals causation. But it is weird that theirs has gone up so much, like double in that 20 years than when it was in 96, when it was high in 96,
Sure.
So to me, that speaks to your point of, it does seem like it's become a thing where people are being victimized because they don't have a way to fight back. And I think that what a lot of people that are like gun control people in America, I think don't often think about, I hear this phrase all the time where it's like, well, if it saves one life, then we should do it. Like we should pass a law that does it. And I'm like, well, have you ever considered that like the guns being around is saving more than one life? Because I know people personally, and plus you can read stories and all sorts of stuff where having the gun and even just being behind a door and saying, I have a gun and I've called the police, and that might get the person to stop trying to break into your house without ever having to fire a weapon. There's no report about it. There's no statistic. Yep. And not to mention, just like I said, I imagine you're going to think more about it if you're in a place that has more of a gun culture. I think that you might think twice about it if you thought that woman might be carrying a gun.
Yep. I mean, that whole point that you made about like being behind a door, just saying you have a gun and that you've called the police is almost enough of a deterrent. I mean, I heard a statistic once that like scientifically proven the number 2 most recognized sound in the world is a shotgun chambering around behind a crying baby. Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, that's a pretty universal language across the board. I think like you hear a child crying, like, oh, like we should probably intervene and do something. Yeah. Like I hear a round chamber, I'm like, I'm probably going to go the other way.
I don't even think it comes to that most of the time. I think I read a stat that, they estimate some pretty legit studies. This is I can't remember who it is. I'm gonna have to try to find the link and I'll put it at the bottom of the show notes. But they estimate happens about 1 million times a year that a gun without being fired deters a violent crime from happening. So that could be an announcement of that I have it. It could be drawing it and not firing it. It could be, lots of other situations. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we know when it happens, when it's like the church shooting in Texas, again, where like the ex FBI guy from the back of the place like took the guy out immediately, and he didn't kill anyone because he came in with guns and he got taken out immediately. Well, obviously we know about when that happens because there's a police report and we can read the stats on how many times, because they call that a justifiable homicide. So we have stats for how many justifiable homicides there are a year, police pulling their weapons, things like that. Mm-hmm. We don't have any stats for if someone was walking to their car and, said, hey, felt threatened by someone and said, hey, if you keep coming towards me, I've got a gun and I'm going to pull it. Mm-hmm. And that person backs off, which they say now, basically some people I follow, some smart, like gun lawyer kind of people are like, you should call the police every time that happens. So there is a statistic
exactly
for it.
Right.
And so that they can track like, look, this prevented that from happening. Mm-hmm. So I think that we don't get into the nuance of this conversation enough. I think that there are reasonable solutions to solving all of these different kinds of gun violence, but specifically with mass shootings, it feels a little, I know premature is the wrong word to say, because it's been almost 30 years since they passed those laws in Australia, which, like I said, I don't think that, I think that would be more interesting to see in a state by state kind of thing in the United States, which there are states that ban those same kind of weapons, and their excuse is always, well, they can get it from these other places or whatever. Okay, fine. But,
maybe,
but like, it just seems like the statistical side of things, people can make work for their side one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So I've seen, for whatever reason, Australia is just the left's kind of,
it's their general, favorite,
it's their favorite example.
And it's unfair in a lot of ways, but it's like Australia is the poster child for like the left's like gun control stuff, and then just like the same way that they use like Sweden for like socialized healthcare,
right?
And I'm like, New York City has more people than Sweden does. Like,
well, and
maybe we should do a trial in New York or Houston or some major city on certain things before we implement it nationwide. 331 million people, by the way.
And also
here in the U.S.
Well, we don't have to get into healthcare stuff, but I mean, it's like same thing. When you pick Sweden, you're picking a homogeneous like group of people. Yep. Yeah, it's like you got this one group, like they're all the same. They're all Swedish,
blonde hair, blue eyed.
Yeah, it's like but like that makes a difference too, because you don't even have that in a city like New York City.
No,
you've got a lot of diversity. You've got diversity of background, of ethnicity,
which makes that city so great, but it makes it really hard because you have all these different cultural influences coming in. Yeah,
and so to pretend that you can get all those people on the same page is, I think that's a little foolish on any kind of policy stuff.
For sure.
Because it's a little easier for even a place like France, who does have some diversity, but they don't really if you're not French, they're kind of like, well, you're not really French. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the problem when people on the left and the right point to countries like Sweden or Hungary on the right now is the new one, or Australia or New Zealand, because there is a population problem or huge difference. And so to put those numbers, that's a good reason you brought that up, by the way. Because, okay, let's do the math.
Right.
On
because stop playing the numbers. Like, if you notice on a lot of these big cable news networks that they waffle in between the hard numbers and the percentages depending on how they want to present things. And I'm like, please stop that. Like, it drives me crazy. Just like, tell us the facts. I think we can handle it.
So here would be the facts on that. Let's just say that, let's pretend and be in our little pretend world. Let's say that gun control advocates get their way and they got an Australian kind of gun buyback program in the United States federally. Okay. Let's just pretend it happens. Okay. Let's pretend it happens. Okay. There are 331 million people here-ish, a little bit more than that. And it's approximate that there's that many guns in America too. Okay. Easy. So probably the same number of civilian owned firearms as there are people in this country. Okay. So, Australia got a fifth to a third of...
Split the difference to do 25%.
Yeah, so let's do whatever. Okay, so that would be between 60 and 105 million guns. Okay? Mm-hmm. How... someone tell me how you think you're going to go around and collect 60 million guns at the low end. If, let's say it could be as successful as Australia's. And at the same time... if let's say you got 60 to 105,000 or 105 million, you're still going to have a lot. You're still going to have 200 million, roughly. 250 million guns in the United States.
On the low end, 200 million for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I'm curious what they think will happen and how they think that will go down. Right. I mean, do you have any theories of how anyone could possibly do that?
I'll put it to you this way. I have an uncle that has a coffee mug with a cannon on it that says, come and get it. So I was like, good luck. Like,
yeah. And I think that, you will have more violence trying to round up 60 million guns from Americans that have, keep in mind, Australia didn't have a Second Amendment. So they can pass that law.
Right.
That law could not be passed without changing the Constitution, essentially, in the United States, which also good luck because we are in like deadlock with everything. We can't agree on a freaking spending package, much less changing the Constitution that takes 2/3 of the country to ratify. So, I don't think it's possible. So I think it's silly to even bring up because it's not realistic. It's kind of like, to me, when gun control advocates talk about stuff like the Australian gun stuff, the buyback and the gun, to me, you're not a serious person because you have to know that that's not possible. And so why even bring it up? Because do you really think that people are just going to be like, oh, well, I guess they passed a law, I'm just going to give this thing up? No, I think you're going to have to go door to door. First of all, logistically, we don't have the resources to do that. I don't know if you've noticed that the federal government is behind on all their immigration stuff. They've got, those courts are backed up. Law enforcement can't keep up with basic. We don't even, right now, we don't even go after someone when they are a felon, fill out the gun form to go buy a gun at Walmart or whatever, and it gets rejected. We're not arresting those people almost ever. I did this stat on one of the little like shorts and reels I did. It was like, I think this was 2017 was what this year was for, but it was out of it was like 112,000 cases in that year where like someone who was not allowed to buy a firearm attempted to buy a firearm and was rejected, or I think most of them were rejected. They only investigated 10% of those, and they only arrested like 12. 12 people or what and I might have those numbers wrong again, but it was and so we're not even taking the laws we have seriously right now, which could prevent that. Cause I'm 100% on board with if someone has a violent history and we say you're not allowed to have a gun anymore, I'm all for if they try to go buy a gun again, throw them in jail. I think that they're clearly wanting to be violent again. If we really care about preventing violence, we would do that. So it's just funny to me that they think that we're going to go around like confiscating 60 million weapons without violence happening.
It's a joke.
On a degree of, where it'd be worse than whatever we were trying to prevent before. And I know there's some people on the left that would just say, well, fine, I don't care if it gets violent between. Well, it's like, okay, but the federal agents that have to go confiscate the guns, do you want them to be shot in the process? I think it's ridiculous to not have any regard for human life just because someone is pro-gun and you're anti-gun. Right. That seems weird to me, but I just don't see how it's possible.
It's not. I mean, logistically speaking, I mean, it's kind of like here. I feel like Oklahoma is kind of a microcosm for the rest of the country. It's like we're so spread out. We don't build up here, not really. Like when you come, we have like two skyscrapers. Yeah. We have room to build because don't believe Bill Gates. We have plenty of room. There's no overpopulating of the earth, but it's just like the amount of the land mass, manpower, man hours. Yeah. I mean, even if in a vacuum, we got everyone to decide like, yeah, this is for the better of humanity in America.
To voluntarily
do it in a vacuum. The process to like do all of that, even if people were coming in peacefully and just saying, here's my registered firearm.
Yeah.
And where are we going to store them all?
Right. And here's the other problem with Australia that most people don't talk about is that they have a huge black market for firearms now. So the illegal market for firearms which it happens everywhere. It happened in the United States with prohibition. Alcohol didn't go away. There was a black market for it, and mob violence and all this stuff rose up because of it. So that's to me, prohibition is a great analog for gun control because we said, all right, we're not going to allow alcohol. That did not stop people from wanting alcohol, though the difference there is that alcohol is not a violent, and same thing though. It's like the reason I think alcohol is a good analogy is because most people just enjoy alcohol without it being a problem. Yeah. It's like, I can have a drink and watch the football game. It's fine. Some people do not. Some people drink and they drive, and some people get violent, and some people are alcoholics, and it's a problem, and it causes health problems and all sorts of other things. To me, it's a good analogy of guns. It's like, I think I'm a good gun owner. I like to train. I like to be knowledgeable about it. I take it very seriously. I don't like gun owners that aren't like that. I think that they give the rest of us a bad name when they're like idiots. And I saw a guy, oh my gosh.
Here we go.
You follow Oklahoma. God bless you. Follow Oklahoma. Last week,
if you're not from Oklahoma, you got to go once. You got to go one time.
It's where my family's lake house is, and I love it. It's my favorite place, like on earth. Yeah. But you go into town, and you're going to see a few. You're going to see some characters, right?
Yeah.
And I saw a guy walking in the liquor store, not with the guns, because it had the no gun sign, so you respected it. But he had a straight on tank top and a shoulder holster. A double handgun shoulder holster, which I'm like, buddy, you are more likely to shoot yourself in the heart trying to draw from that thing.
Oh yeah,
it's just not wise. It's like he thinks he looks like Dick Tracy or something.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, minus the cool hat and outfit because he's got a freaking NASCAR tank top or whatever on. Yeah. But and there's all sorts of reasons I think that outfit is foolish, because I think it also makes you a target if someone does want to come in and rob the liquor store or whatever. They might not even look and notice that you don't have a gun in it. They're going to see the holster, and you're the first one going down because you're the first threat to them. So, but like alcohol, it's like kind of like that. It's like, and with prohibition, we just learned it did not work. We did not get rid of alcohol. We didn't stop people drinking. We just like increased violent crime because the mob took over, like selling alcohol to people and stuff. So to me, you've got the same problem in Australia. You've got a black market now for weapons that are still there because they did not get all the guns. No. And these are still being used in violent crimes. There just hasn't been a mass shooting. The violent crime has not disappeared in Australia. There are not no shootings in Australia. There are not no guns in Australia.
Correct.
There's just a black market for it. And so the same thing would happen here, especially when you're talking about, let's say, like I said, idealistically, you got 100 million of them. That's a third of what's out there. And there's still 200 something million guns in circulation that can be stolen. Most criminals do not buy weapons. Most criminals steal weapons.
What do you mean?
Or if they buy them from someone who stole them. So I think the stat was like 95% of criminals in prison who had a weapon on them when arrested, essentially, or were arrested for a violent crime, got it illegally, either buying it on the black market illegally from someone that stole it or stealing it themselves. So when you make something illegal, all you really do is make law-abiding citizens not able to get that thing because they'll follow the law. But criminals don't care, and it's already easy to get a gun in the United States. The interesting thing about that for me is that most of the mass shootings that happen, I've never seen one where someone got the gun illegally.
No, that just like I said with Coleon Noir, he just recently said the one in Jacksonville. The police chief said that there were no indicators. He passed his background check. I mean that form. It's just like I filled all of mine out. Honestly, obviously, I'm also a law-abiding citizen.
So you can. Yeah. I think the problem with that when it comes to background checks is that. Well, sorry, that's not true. There is one where they got them illegally. It was the San Bernardino one. They had their friend purchase them for them. So it's straw purchase. And that's about the only straw purchase I've seen get prosecuted in the last, because it was so egregious. Like this guy obviously bought people that weren't supposed to have them. And because they weren't citizens, and so they weren't allowed to buy the guns. And so someone bought them for them. So that guy went to jail as he should have. That's the only one I know. And even that it was still through the legal means, but it was like one person acted illegally in the sense that they bought it knowing they were going to transfer it to someone else that wasn't allowed to have the weapon. So even that's like not a gray area, but it is one of those things where it's like, it wasn't that they stole them. And so far there's not been a mass shooting where I think that's happened, where they were stolen weapons or they couldn't trace them back. They were all generally legally bought. I think that's really where you can make a difference though, is I think the background check system is woefully under, it doesn't work.
It's under-resourced, grossly.
Yeah, because there's the two problems there in my opinion, are that we're not like, so that Texas one, he shouldn't have been able to buy a weapon because he'd been convicted and kicked out of the Navy for like trying to kill his wife, essentially.
Now, is this? I think I missed one because this
was a long time
since.
ago.
Oh,
no,
okay,
this was the church in Texas, and
this wasn't this around like 2015 ish, somewhere around there.
I'm so bad at years now
Yeah.
that I have kids; it all just blurs together.
Yeah.
This was the one where he was ex-Navy. He had been kicked out of the military for basically violently attacking his wife.
Mm-hmm.
They never sent the alert to the NICS system to like say that he shouldn't be able to buy a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think they got sued. I think the government got sued, and they won by the people that got killed in the shooting, because it was like, you guys were supposed to. Here's the system we have laid out, and that was federal on federal. That wasn't even like, oh, some local precinct didn't get it to the thing. This was like the federal government didn't tell the other part of the federal government. This guy who's clearly has a history of violence. And I'm all for. I think if you have, I don't think we take domestic violence seriously enough. I think that we should take it more seriously, in the sense that
Absolutely.
almost always, because I want to talk about mass shooting specifically, because I think that, like I said, gang violence is different. I think domestic stuff is different, but most of the time we had plenty of red flags. Like the Vegas is the only one that I remember as of in the last 20 years where everyone was scratching their head going like, never would have ever, no idea. He wasn't violent. He had never been violent towards a spouse or something. There was no clear motivation. He didn't leave some sort of manifesto. He didn't seem to be copying other mass shooters. Like, we really have no idea what happened there. But the rest of them are like, oh yeah, one time he fired a gun in the air like when he was mad at his kid. It's like, well, red flag. We should take his guns away and not let him. You shouldn't get to fire your gun in the air angrily and get to continue to have it. Right. Or he beat his wife. Well, I mean, that's normally what it is. It's normally that they're violent towards spouses or girlfriends. Well, we should take that seriously. Or if you're a kid and you're killing animals or something like that, we should be like, this is behavior. One of the recent ones that was like a kid was like shooting a BB gun at people from a car or something. We got to take that kind of stuff seriously. And we claim we take it seriously, but we don't really.
No, not really. I mean, banning guns, I mean, one of my counselors told me one time, you kind of have like the leaf, the branch, the trunk, and the roots of a problem.
Yeah.
Gun control in trying to like ban anything at best is a branch, and it's probably actually more of a leaf.
I think it's more of a leaf problem.
Yeah.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah, that's smart.
The root of the problem here is a lot of mental health stuff, but also, I mean, look at what like California's going through right now. I mean, criminals know that as long as they keep the theft under whatever $950, whatever it is, they're going to, and so there's video, I mean, like literal hours of video online right now you can see of these smash and grabs.
Yeah.
Because shocker, human nature, we have more than enough written history to prove that like if there's no punishment, the crime is going to continue to happen.
Yeah.
And so again, yes, there are some anomalies out there, but there's always going to be statistical anomalies. It's just the way it is. But it's just like harsher punishments for breaking these crimes.
Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, it's just like if the Justice Department, in my opinion, and I mean, this is technically a political podcast. So we can get political.
You can, absolutely.
If Hunter Biden is still walking free right now, they ought to make him the poster child for it and be like, this is what's going to happen to you. And we don't care what your last name is, how much money you got in the bank, or who is the big guy. You're going to federal prison for this. You broke a huge law, and it's a huge problem.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Hunter Biden would be a statistical anomaly if they did prosecute him for the gun crime, because, like I mentioned, in 2017, there were 112,000 situations. Keep in mind, Hunter wasn't even he wasn't federally prohibited by law in the sense that, like, he didn't have a criminal prosecution that said, oh, you know, or a criminal he wasn't found guilty of a crime that allowed him to not have a gun. He just lied about not being a drug addict.
Right. Oh, yeah, because you have to answer that question.
Like, never happens. No one ever gets prosecuted for lying about being a drug addict on that form. Now, I think that we can say whether you should or shouldn't. I think that probably should be the case with some of it, but I don't find that drug addiction is the most common like path to that violent kind of stuff. It's not that it's not sometimes. It tends to be more drug dealing
Right.
that's a problem than drug consumption. So we can have a debate about whether that should even be on that form or not. I think it shouldn't be for like marijuana for sure. I mean,
the fact that marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug is a joke. Like,
yeah, I think that it's not the same thing as being addicted to crack. It's not the same
Not at
thing. And so, but I mean, my point, Hunter Biden would be an anomaly if they prosecute him for that. And I'm fine with it because that's the law. The law says you lie on the form, it's a 10-year kind of thing. But we're just not taking that seriously enough. I think that you're right. I think we should. And then we can have a debate about whether we should do it with drugs and all the other kind of stuff. But I think for sure we should say if you are prohibited from owning a firearm specifically because of a criminal conviction, I'm like fine with that. But that's not who does these mass shootings. It's almost never someone with a criminal history, or if they have a criminal history, it's like domestic abuse, it's misdemeanors maybe. Maybe there's some stuff. For the most part, it's like young, it's mostly white. It's not entirely white like everyone claims it is. It's a little more racially diverse, but it's these young, completely isolated men for the most part. We had a female one last year, but that was about the first one since the San Bernardino thing. I'm pretty sure it's not often female. So it's mostly like lonely, young, white males with no criminal history. Makes it really hard to stop.
True.
I personally think the best solution to stopping mass shootings, which is not very popular, is for the media to stop talking about the shooters so much.
Oh, yeah.
I think that putting their faces on TV is exactly what they wanted. I think talking about their manifestos or the reasons or like giving any motivating and trying to explain it by their motivations, I think is wrong. Because it's like, look, it doesn't matter what someone's motivation is for going in and killing people. It doesn't really matter if they're just crazy. Yeah. It doesn't matter if they just want to be famous. It doesn't matter if they're racist.
Yeah.
None of it really matters.
Right.
And I think you just add fuel to the fire for more people. They're all copying each other. And so to me, that's the difference, is that you can see this line. Malcolm Gladwell has a great article in the New Yorker, like I think in early 2000s or maybe 2010 or something like that. But about specifically how Columbine in America, like most of the especially young, like white man, like school shootings specifically, and even some of the other mass shootings, they all copy the same things. They do the same video thing, kind of manifesto stuff. They even do the same kind of like sort of pre-game kind of thing for all this stuff. Well, that's because we put it on TV and we put it in the news and on the internet. And obviously we have the First Amendment. We can't say that news organizations can't release the names, but to me, it'd be a really good start. We do that with suicides right now. By we, I mean like the media at large decided a long time ago. They were like, look, we are kind of responsible for how we talk about suicide in the sense that we can be encouraging more people to do that behavior. There's been a lot of studies about towns where like one kid kills himself and it turns into a social contagion where like 12 kids in a small town kill themselves in a couple of years. And it's like, it's a social contagion thing. It's the way they talk about it. So the media has decided a long time ago, they were like, we've got to change the way. So we're not going to show someone standing on a bridge threatening to jump off. That encourages more people to do that because then they get on the news. Okay. So if you notice, the news does not do that anymore. And I think there was a short, I think I've actually said this before, but there was a short they kind of forgot about those rules when Robin Williams died. And there was like a 10% increase in suicides the following month.
Wow.
And it's like correlation generally does not equal causation, but that was like one of those things where you're like, look, it's like this all the time. And then it bumps up right after someone famous kills themselves. And we threw out all the rules about how we talk about it because we were all so shocked. And it was such a lovable like figure that we were just shocked by and stuff. But they kind of threw some of those rules out. And then when they saw that uptick, they were like, oh, we got to dial that back in. I think they got to do the same thing with mass shootings. I think that's the first step.
Right.
I think that we could drastically make a difference. And some new news organizations are doing the right thing now. They're actually, a lot of them that I read now will not ever say the person's name. They're just like, we're not going to do it. We don't think it's important, especially when they've already died because most of the time they kill themselves at the end of this thing or they get shot. When that happens, they're like, why do we need, like, they're not going to trial. This isn't innocent until proven guilty or anything like that. We're just not going to say their name. We're not going to publish their manifesto. Yeah. I remember the South Carolina, the church one, where the kid went in and shot 9 black people. It was clearly racially motivated and stuff. That was one where like CNN had his like racist website up on. That was like, well, you know how many people had been to that website before today? 0 probably.
Yeah. We need to get the statistics on that.
You know what I mean? And now it's that Streisand effect. You know, it's like you tell people, oh, now people are reading this thing, and there's some crazy person that's going to be influenced by it.
Yeah,
I think that's the first step we have to do, but I don't think banning guns is going to solve it.
No, not in the least. It's I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel, and this is just kind of Derek Elliott's opinion, but
that's fine. We allow that here.
Praise God.
You can just have
We're still
opinions.
free, for now. It's kind of like the shopping cart litmus test.
Yeah.
There's no law
about
not putting up your shopping cart.
Right.
But it's like, are you that guy or gal? You know?
Yeah.
And it's just, I feel like it's the same kind of moral obligation is what you're essentially getting at with this reporting of it. And that's like, I don't know about the family that you were raised in, but it's like, I definitely was not allowed to listen to Marilyn Manson growing up.
Yeah.
And it was, he was spooky. And I mean, like, as an adult, digging into both his music and just like who he is, Brian Warner, man, did the guy know how to cash in on some fear? Like, and it's a little bit eye roll, but it's like everybody in the band had to take on the name of like a serial killer and a pretty girl, because that's what the news was obsessed with. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that is so brilliant. Like, as an adult,
it is a marketing thing for sure.
was.
Although anyone that thought that music was what caused people to go kill people is, I mean, there's always that thread. We're always, we've been doing this since like the 5th with comic books. We did this in the 40s and 50s and stuff. I mean, it's always, it's comic books, it's video games, it's music. It's like you're picking something that all teenagers like. Not all, but I mean, like you're picking something that's like widely enjoyed by young people. And then because someone was violent, well, that must have been the reason that it happened. Yeah. And I certainly think there is some, like if you are mentally, some of these people are legitimately mentally ill. I don't think it's not the majority of them. I don't think most of the people, I think mental illness is kind of a scapegoat sometimes in these situations. I think like the Nashville one, the most kind of recent one that happened, I mean, that was clearly someone that was actually mentally ill, like diagnosed mentally ill. Yep. But like most of these people are just evil, honestly. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. They're not mental. They know what they're doing is wrong. And to me, there's like, when we cop out that it's like, oh, we do have mental health crisis in America. I don't think the mental health crisis is what's driving mass shootings, though. I think that it's the way we talk about them, the way we make them notorious. I think people want to be, especially if you're like isolated, you don't have friends, like you're like, well, I'm going to show them and kind of go out with a bang or whatever. Right. That's like, you're giving them what they want. And I think that that's kind of the scariest thing, is that I don't, it's not a very popular opinion, but I think that you could say, if you could snap, like, let's go even further and pretend that you could snap your fingers and all the guns disappeared in America tomorrow. Sad day. I don't think violence would stop.
It would just shift.
It would shift. It would, like we've seen mass, sort of these same kind of mass attacks using vans, using cars. We've had that happen in this state. We've had it at OSU. We had a lady drive her car and kill several people into a parade. It's like, this is a thing. Like, people are, and for whatever reason, Americans are more violent than other countries. And I'm not trying to shift it and say that like guns don't have something to do with it. Obviously, a gun is an easier way to kill people than a knife. So, but like, Japan has a lot of stabbings. They don't have guns, but they've got a lot of stabbings. And some people would say, well, you can't kill 30 people in 5 minutes with a knife. And I would argue that you can. There's been situations where people have killed a lot of people with knives, or what was the guy that had a freaking bow and arrow one place and was like taking people out? I'm just saying, like, you've got to look at the heart, like what's causing people to be violent. And I think that's the place to start. And some of that is mental illness, and some of that is not solvable, because we can't legislate that people don't lock themselves in their basement and get on Reddit and get in a racist community that encourages them to go kill a bunch of people. Right. I just think that that's a hard problem to solve.
Right. Yeah. I mean, violence. It's like I was having this conversation with my oldest son the other day. He's 12. And so there's definitely been like a shift in the way I treat him and like the way I talk to him. And he's just like kind of looking at me. I'm like, you're a man now. And it's like, you need to learn how to start having these conversations, Yeah. And he said something about going to war. And I'm like, I really hope we don't. And he said, why? I was like, because nobody actually wins.
Yeah. I mean, who wants to?
Yeah. And he's like, but, and I'm like, no, son, there's no buts. Like nobody like wins in war ever. Like there's always a loss of life. And me personally, I'm like, human life is sacred, you know? And so I don't want to go to war at all. And violence is never the answer. But yeah, I mean, like there's communities on both sides of these political spectrums that are very extreme, that are encouraging violence, and it's disgusting.
Yeah.
And I had a friend one time during, and I'm not trying to downplay, you know, but there is so many to keep up with. One of these most recent shootings, it might have been the Uvalde one. And he was talking about the tragedy and how there needs to be, you know, the guns rounded up and the typical kind of like leftist talking points.
Which by the way, I totally understand. Like that is anyone who doesn't say that's a tragedy is not.
Oh, they're not human beings.
I think even people on the right aren't good enough about being like, this is evil and wrong and we should try to prevent this.
Right.
But anyway, go on.
Yeah. And I said, would that have been any less of a tragedy if any other instrument of destruction was used? And you can't say no.
Right.
So therefore, it's like again, leaf, branch, trunk, root. It's like this is a leaf. The gun is the leaf.
Yeah.
Like, let's move forward with this. So yeah.
I think that we've got to do better. We're not doing a good job in this country about talking about first of all, we can't even define, as mentioned earlier, we're not even defining things correctly.
Right.
So I think that's like step one. We've got to I think gun control people would do themselves some favors to actually like learn some stuff about it. And I think that when they confuse semi-automatic and automatic and they call it assault rifle, and there's some stuff like that I think that they would be wise to like at least speak the right language and have the same, and not try to inflate the stats. Try to lump in like domestic violence or gang violence or these kind of other things and try to pretend and fearmonger people into thinking that there's just mass shootings that happen all the time. Mass shootings are still exceedingly rare. When we talk about rifles in the United States, something like of the 11,000 murders a year, something like 300 are rifles, all rifles.
Right.
Okay. So we're talking like about 2% of all murders are committed by any kind of rifle, much less like what they would call an assault rifle. So it really is statistically a tiny amount of the problem. Most of these things, most even mass shootings are handguns and stuff. And you want to talk about the most widespread gun in the world, especially the United States, is the semi-automatic handgun. Short of an all-out ban, you're never going. There's not a state that you're going to be able to get rid of, like not able to buy a handgun. Now, some of them have like magazine limits and things like that, but even in California, you can buy a handgun. So I just don't think it's very realistic to pretend that like we've got a gun control problem and not a violence problem.
Right.
And I think that's when people try, like you mentioned, the sheriff of this most recent one in Jacksonville was like, look, if you put a gun on the table, it's not going to do anything.
Sit there and collect dust.
I think that's close to what his quote was. It was like, it's all who picks it up is what makes the difference. And so that to me is the thing we got to mitigate is how do we determine who are those violent people and who aren't? I don't think that we're in a situation as a country where we can minority report this and know when someone's going to do it in advance. Right. We can't do that. So if someone has no criminal history and no reason they can't own a gun, I don't see any way that we're going to prevent it other than the social connections that person has. So I think that some of these, the families are to blame for sure. I think the families were not. There was a situation where a freaking 6-year-old shot his teacher with a gun that, like, you know, was clearly accessible to him and to put in his backpack and take to school. Obviously, that mom is facing charges, as she should, in that situation.
Yeah, if you're going to be a firearm owner, you have to be responsible.
And he had been violent like multiple times already before, like that. And that's my point. Violence is a thing that escalates almost all the time. Someone starts with like, you know, like doing stuff to their dog, or they're killing animals, and then it's like shooting people with a slingshot or a pellet gun or something, and then it turns into maybe a fight. And we've got to stop violence before it gets to the point where they're killing people with guns. That's just, I think that we should take domestic abuse very seriously of kids and spouses, and we don't take it seriously enough. I think if we took the laws that we already had on the books more seriously, I think violent crime would go down. But we don't have right now. We're kind of at a weird spot where people think that's people think that's like Minority Report. If we put someone in jail, if we say, well, you beat your wife, you can't own a gun anymore. Some people are like, oh, that's too much. It's like, why?
Yeah.
They were violent towards someone they were stronger than already. Mm-hmm. Why would we give them a weapon that makes them even more dangerous? Right. I think that that's a reasonable position to take. And we're not, or Hunter Biden is a cokehead. He shouldn't have a gun. I'm fine with that being a law, but we're not enforcing that law right now. So I think we've got to do that. But I really don't think there's a great solve for mass shootings other than take the law seriously that we have and try to make it easier to let authorities be aware of those people. And almost all of these situations too, a lot of times the police knew of this person too. They had interactions with them. They had been to their house multiple times for domestic kind of calls and stuff. It's super sad, but it's one of those things where we can't throw people in jail until they commit a crime. We can't arrest people unless they commit a crime.
I mean, that's constitutional rights, right?
Yeah, and I think that's how it should be. But once you are, found guilty of a crime, I'm fine with us being like, hey, you got a tighter leash on you now. I'm also open to, there's some people that think that we shouldn't take away someone's Second Amendment rights for the rest of their life after they paid their dues. I think it depends on the crime. I think that we should say, I think every felony, that shouldn't be the case, but I think violent ones, I'm totally okay with being like, if you committed a violent crime, we don't give you tools to be violent even after. That's part of your sentence. Right. I mean, I think you have to kind of change the way it's sentencing and stuff, but that's where I'm at.
I mean, to our point earlier when we first started talking, like, it's very nuanced, so it's like, if the domestic violence charge was he was yelling at his wife, that's different than the guy who actually puts his hands on his wife.
But it's not illegal to yell at your wife. Right. So you wouldn't get arrested for that. You might get called out to the house. Right. But, you're not going to get... But yeah, if you put your hands on her, I think it's like, yeah, I don't want you to have guns. I think we don't take lesser violence seriously enough until it escalates to a thing that becomes newsworthy. Right. Like, unfortunately, we don't see a lot of stories on the news about, because it wouldn't sell that much, but like local man beats his wife, unless it's like someone famous. Unless it's Rihanna, we don't get to see that mugshot or whatever, what her face looks like after it. And I think we're not talking enough about that kind of violence because that's the problem. I mean, really, when you look at homicides, it's like 11,000 a year or something like that. It's been ticking up. It was going down for a long time. It's been ticking up a little bit since 2017.
Is that on a national level?
Yeah, it's United States. So basically, gun violence, really all violent crime went down from like the 90s, like I mentioned, and then it kind of started upticking again in 2017. And obviously, 2020 was a little bit of a spike in some of that too. But so it's had a little bit of a tick up. But to me, you look at it's like call it 11, 12,000 homicides a year with guns specifically. You divide that, or I think that might be all, but anyway, whatever. You take all the homicides and you look at it, and like mass shootings are just such a small, like I said, like 300 of them or, ish or something like that. I'm not saying those 300 lives are not like
they matter.
They totally matter. It's super tragic. Let's try to figure out how we can prevent it. I'm just saying, I think we can prevent those other 11,000 easier than we can that 300.
Yeah. I mean, well, and there are warning signs almost always. Yeah. And I shouldn't say always, but a lot of the time there are warning signs. Yeah. Like you said, kicking dogs, needlessly killing animals and things like that, bullies, it's like all those signs are there.
And sometimes it's not just the signs. Sometimes the previous criminal, like the interaction with police and things like that. And we'll have to have a whole nother podcast. What I'll probably do, what I want to do at least is like have a series on this, because I don't think that this is a topic that you can solve. I mean, you can't even talk about it for just one, and we would be here for hours. So, I mean, I think that there's lots of factors. There's what's the history of it? What's like, how is America different than other countries? What is the violent crime rate? What is most of the violent crime? What is like handguns versus, I mean, I just think there's so many, like, what do we not, should we allow drug users to, I mean, I think there's lots of things that we can talk about, but there's not, I don't see those discussions happening on a national level. All I see is the talking points of one side going, I'm going to protect your rights no matter what, which I think is a little bit, I think that's pandering as much as the other side is going like, we're going to get gun control passed, when I think that both sides know that neither Neither one of them are really telling the truth, especially politicians when they come out and say, oh, I'm going to, whatever, day one, you see when Democrats run for president, it's like, well, day one, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. It's like, you don't have that power, first of all, and you know that. And like, you can't ban gun. You can't do, you can't do the things you're saying you want to do. And secondly, you also know that that's not going to, I think they know it won't solve the problem when politicians do it. Because I think politicians, we should hold to a higher standard than the average Joe. Someone on Twitter or Facebook after one of those shootings that's like, we should do this. I get it. It's emotional. Everyone thinks it's terrible, especially in a situation where there's kids involved. I mean, like, I can't think of a worse situation than kids getting killed. I mean, there's just not. Right. And it doesn't really matter how. It's tragic when it's a shooting. It's tragic when it's a tornado. Yes. It sucks. Yep. No one ever wants to see it happen. And we should go, how do we prevent this from happening again? I'm totally fine with that. Mm-hmm. It's just that I don't think politicians are very, I think on the right, pretending it's not something that can be solved at all is silly. And I think that on the left, pretending that you could just like ban assault rifles, so-called, and we will get rid of this problem. I think both of those arguments are foolish. Unfortunately, that's what politicians and the media stick to. Right. So that's what most citizens stick to too, because they're just kind of parroting the talking point they heard from whatever the source is that they pay attention to.
Well, and that's one thing I've appreciated about your podcast since you started doing this is like you're having intellectually honest conversations. And that's like when people ask me, I'm like, okay, like I will talk to you about this and not try to change your mind, but you're asking me my opinion. Yeah. I was just like, if you want to have an intellectually honest conversation, because if not, let's just talk about literally anything underneath the sun. I'll even talk about OU football with you, and I don't even really love that much, but I don't want to talk about this if you're not willing to have an honest conversation, because again, talking points from both sides is so infuriating, and I don't feel that I am an abnormality in that. I feel like that's a lot of Americans are frustrated.
Yeah.
And we need to be having more conversations. Again, we're not on here with this series trying to get people to love guns.
No, I mean, I think that because it's built in the culture, I'm like, I think people should appreciate, like, my personal experience is that the more I learn about any rights that we have as Americans, the more I want to utilize those. Right. So like, but that goes across the board. Right. Like I feel the same way about the Fifth Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and I mean, all, like it's not that I'm elevating one over the other. And I think that that's another problem is that some people want to elevate, like they want to pick and choose which ones they like. And I'm like, no, I mean, I'm fine with discussing things. I think we can even change the Constitution if we want to. We have. Right. I don't think that
that's the countries the amendments are.
Yeah, that's what they are. I mean, they're literally amendments, guys. Yeah. It's the name of the
game.
But so we can change it if we want to, and I'm fine with having that conversation. I don't think it's realistic that you're going to get rid of the Second Amendment. I don't think it's even realistic that you're going to change a single word in the Second Amendment to make it more clear from the right or ban something on the left. Mm-hmm. I just think that we're not. But most of the people I talk to, at least that bring it up with me, because I am sort of this political junkie. Mm-hmm. So when something like this happens, I tend to get the text from people that are like, what can we do? Or they're at least like, but a lot of times they do say the things that they hear on the news. And I'm like, yeah, well, what about this though? And they're like, oh, I never even thought about that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had a friend that thought, I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but he thought that you could just walk into Walmart and buy a gun. He thought that was just like how it worked. And I was like, no. And he tweeted something about it. I just like private messaged him. I was like, hey, just so you know, like you do have to like fill out a federal background check form. It has to clear. If it doesn't immediately clear, they've got to clear it within 3 days. So you might have to come back. Like you cannot just walk in and purchase a weapon. And he was like, oh, I didn't know, because now, to be fair, I think he should have known that. But to be fair, the people that he was listening to were pretending. I mean, like, Bowling for Columbine, that was a great example of like, they edited that to look like Michael Moore walked into a place and walked out with a gun. He didn't. He was in a state that had a 3-day waiting period, I think, and he had to go back and get it. But they edited it to make it look like he walked in and walked out with the gun to make it look. And I think that is, I really, really don't like the people that are twisting those facts. I think it happens more on the gun control side, but it happens on the right too. I don't like when people say that like there's nothing we can do to solve this, or that the common thing is like, well, mass shooting happens, they're like, well, yeah, but how many people got shot in Chicago this week? It's like, I feel like you're being a little callous to the fact that like some people died,
Right?
when you're
On
just
both
like,
sides,
look
yeah.
at these other people that died, and you don't care about that. And I think there's a valid point to both of them.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it's not. It doesn't mean it's the right point to make in the moment.
Right.
And I also think that people just retreat to their corners of where their tribe is and don't really, they're just shouting at each other, but no one's really listening. I really wish people, this is one of those things. It's like, I hate to break it to you, Second Amendment's probably not going away. Guns are probably not going away. Even if we passed Australian level gun buybacks, you'd still have 200 million guns in America. So they're not going away. They didn't go away in Australia. It's something that we have to be able to figure out how we're going to deal with it. With the actual facts and the state of where we're at as a country or your individual state or whatever it is. And I think that we've got to allow people to do that. But I don't know. I don't know how to make people, I try to have that kind of reasonable conversation but it's hard. It's like, I never want to be the person that jumps into the conversation on like someone posting that on Facebook. 'Cause it's the wrong place to do it generally. So, but if someone comes to me, I'm like, yeah, let's have this discussion. Let's do it on here.
Well, I mean, given our age, we remember life prior to the internet, much less social media.
Right.
And so, like, you and I will pop off. I've seen you kind of get quippy with some people before. I'm like, I like Blake for this exact reason.
Normally only if they're lying.
Sure.
I would normally only get like, hey, that's actually not, well,
Right.
lying is probably that's maybe even too harsh. They're at least saying something's not true.
Yeah.
They might have just be parroting something they heard, but I'll be able to say, hey, that's actually not true. This is the real number or whatever. Like, because we got to at least start with we got to start with the same terminology, but we got to start with the same facts.
Yeah.
And if we can't agree on those two things, which unfortunately more and more it does feel like in political stuff, we are in a situation where we can't even agree on the facts. If we can't start with terminology and facts, we are definitely not going to be able to have a discussion about something.
Right.
But you tell me if you figure out how to get people on board with facts, because I've had some trouble with that.
We're living in such a strange time. Someone said to me one time, well, that's your truth. And
God.
I'm sorry, but there's the truth and then there's your opinion on the truth, and the truth doesn't change. Like, so
that is my pet peeve right now.
Totally.
Like, that's my absolute pet peeve. And we could do a whole episode about your truth. 'Cause I'm like, no. Your opinion is a thing or your experience is a thing, but we can have something is either true or it is not true. Yep. There's no, oh, well, that can be true to you and not true to me. It's like unicorns do not exist. That is true. Okay. You can't be like, well, my truth is that they exist. That's just not how things work. But that is how we've gotten in political discussions, it feels like, is people are like, well, this is, and that's where terminology, I think, makes a big difference. I think to be fair, not really to be fair, I guess that's not really the right terminology here. I think that the left does more of that twisting of words and changing the meaning of words than the right does. Yeah. Which makes it really hard to have a discussion with someone on the far part of the left, because they tend to have totally different definitions for things. It's like I said, they're defining mass shooting totally different than I am. So it's really hard to talk about mass shooting solutions when they think there's been 300 this year so far, and I think there's been 3. There's a big difference. I don't actually know what the numbers are. What they would claim it is. I'll put them on the screen or on the notes of what the difference between what the FBI says is a mass shooting and what it's one specific organization that every media organization now cites, and they count literally any time a gun is fired at 3 or more people.
Yes.
Whether it was indiscriminate or it was gang violence or whether it was domestic. And I think that that's just not being honest.
Right. Well, and we don't report gun violence appropriately.
Yeah.
It's like it's all just lumped into this category of like gun violence. Yeah. And it's like, that's kind of like saying like, oh, fast food. Well, I'm like, well, are we talking about like Taco Bell? Are we talking about KFC? Like, what are we talking about?
Well, part of that problem though is that, Republicans passed a law in Congress that basically said like they wouldn't fund any gun research stuff. I think that's a little foolish, because if you're not like, I'm not afraid of that data, because I think the data will clearly show that like guns save lives a lot of times,
Well,
in defensive situations and without even being drawn. And I think that it would so I'm not scared of that data.
Right.
And when you pass a law like that says, oh, we're not going to federally fund any gun research. Well, it's kind of like, it's the same problem with marijuana right now. Like you can't really research it because it's still technically a federal crime to do so. And so I think there's some of that stuff that Congress needs to get out of the way and let the data, let people do research on, should marijuana be a Schedule 1? Should we let's analyze gun violence more. I mean, some states and localities don't even comply with the FBI's gathering of that data. So the FBI is having to guess on and extrapolate from like trends in some of the country because they don't even get all that data from law enforcement. From some states do not give them their violent crime statistics. So even the FBI stats are incomplete. Well, I don't think we're doing I don't think we're never going to be able to solve a problem if we don't have the facts and the data in front of us, and we can't even get that right now. So I actually think that's something that Republicans could do better about, is say, we're not scared of what the results are going to be of this. I think what they're hedging that like, oh, well, it's going to be left-leaning people that do the research and they're going to fudge the numbers to make it look worse. That's fine, but like, again, I think that why can't you then rebut that with like, yeah, well, you did not cite this and I think that we shouldn't ever be scared to go, let's look at that study and let's see where they did stuff right. Because there's good studies, there's bad studies. That's across the board with anything.
True.
So let's not be scared of it. Let's get more data and find solutions.
It's a little hard to complete a puzzle if you don't have all the pieces,
Yeah.
So I'm not scared of that data either. And it's going to lend itself to some pretty shocking and revelatory results, in my opinion, because our friend Colion Noir would argue that the statistics to show that guns actually save more lives every year are incomplete and far outweigh anything else.
Because if the like less statistics, but that study of defensive use of guns, and even when it wasn't fired or even drawn, if that really is, they think it's 1 million violent crimes a year that are prevented by it, 11,000 homicides, you can figure out that it's like, well, yeah, it's at least saving more. Not that all 1 million of those would be murders. That's not what they're saying. They're saying violent crime, like it prevented a rape or it prevented a robbery or it prevented a carjacking or something like that. But it's all violent crime. But I mean, you have to look at both those things. But we don't have, there's a couple of studies that have tried to extrapolate those numbers from data that is not complete. I'm sure that there's, it's not perfect because it'd be better if we just knew, if we actually had like a button, or if every single person that ever were a gun prevented, they called the police, told them what happened, and that we had like some sort of record of it, but we don't have that now. So,
I mean, most law enforcement that I know, like on a local level, so like our police are like, I don't know about you, but as a kid, it was like, oh, you only dialed 911 if it was an emergency.
Yeah.
And that is so far from the truth. It's like, because now that I knew that and I kind of had that permission to wield that, man, I was watching a domestic violence dispute go down one time in traffic.
Yeah.
This dude's like just wailing on this girl.
Yeah.
Boop.
Yep.
White sedan,
license plate, all that
whatever.
stuff.
Yeah. I was like, he's heading this way. I mean, I got down to, he's heading west on 10th Street, like from here, like, please. I mean, this girl is in danger. And thank you.
That's such a good thing because I same thing as a kid. We thought like 911's for like someone's bleeding, houses on fire, or someone's, but like, I talked to police and they're like, we want you to call 911 like
always, anytime
you think, even if it's just something suspicious. They're like, I did like neighborhood watch stuff in my last neighborhood, and the guy that kind of trained us was like, look, like, worst case scenario, if you call and we come out and someone was being sketchy, and even if we don't interact with them, if they see the police show up, they know you live in a neighborhood where you're going to call the police if someone's acting suspicious 1,000%. Or whatever. And they're like, we'll come like right along with you. We'll turn our lights on. We'll like do all, like, we want to, their goal is to like push crime out of your neighborhood and then eventually out of the city. And like, and so they're like, yeah, call anytime, like something, there was a tree trunk in the road one time. I was like, someone's going to hit that and wreck the crap out of their vehicle. Yeah, you call them. They're like, great, we'll get someone over there. But if no one calls, it's not. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent. But Anyway, it's been a good conversation, Derek. Thanks for coming by, and
my
we will do it again, I'm sure, because we have not solved gun violence yet.
No, we
I don't
have not.
We'll see what happens when we release this. Maybe it will. See what
Hopefully,
happens. We could have that kind of influence.
Awesome.
Doubt it. Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, cheers.